The world as we know it is forever gone. In the fall of civilization, the worst thing imaginable has happened. A total nuclear apocalypse. The entire world has been transformed into an inhospitable and vicious wasteland. There was one company that saw all of this coming, Vault-Tec. It saw the future of humanity destroying itself, and it wanted to provide a solution, a safe haven. So spending trillions of dollars, it opened up massive vaults all across America, providing refuge from the nuclear fallout and survival for hundreds of years for the residents inside them. But little did anyone know that their plans were much more insidious than anyone could ever imagine. The vaults would be more hellish than anything the bombs could have produced. Secretly, Vault-Tec used these vaults to conduct cruel and inhumane experiments, all in the name of scientific discovery. But what they didn't expect was how this was going to affect the Wasteland, because not only did their experiments torture the people inside, but they changed the face of the Wasteland forever. This is why today we're exploring why Vault-Tec's experiments are still ruining the Wasteland centuries later. Now, Vault 106. Starting off, we have Vault 106. Located in the capital Wasteland, it held 107 inhabitants, 95 test subjects, and 12 researchers. Now, those 12 researchers didn't seem too odd at first. Maybe they were there to sustain vault life, monitor systems, keep things running. But the head overseer wasn't just an administrator, it was Dr. Albert Lairs, the head of the psychology research department. That choice held a much darker purpose, because this wasn't a vault built to survive the apocalypse. It was built to study what happens when you break the human mind. 10 days after the vault sealed, a powerful psychoactive compound was pumped directly into the air circulation system. At first, the results were confusion and disorientation. People started seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices, losing track of time. Conversations stopped making sense. People forgot where they were, who they were talking to. Then paranoia set in, suspicion, fear, and eventually, violence. Friends turned on each other. Families broke apart. The overseer himself began documenting his own psychological collapse, writing logs where he couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't anymore. The vault didn't fall in one moment. It rotted from the inside out. By the time anyone from the outside ever found Vault 106, it wasn't a community. It was a graveyard filled with people who were still alive. The survivors weren't functioning humans. They were trapped in a constant state of hallucination and aggression, attacking anything that moved as if it was part of whatever nightmare they were still stuck inside. But now it's even worse, because Vault 106 is still open, like a lure, like a trap, glowing in the dark wasteland, pulling people in. Scavengers, explorers, anyone desperate enough to search for supplies. They walk inside thinking it's just another abandoned vault. And then it happens again. The air is still toxic, the hallucinations don't stop, and anyone who enters starts to see things, hear things, lose themselves the same way the original residents did. The experiment never ended. It just lost its original subjects. With Vault 106, Vault-Tec didn't just destroy a population, they created a place where reality itself breaks down and left it running, an open nightmare machine, waiting for the next person to walk in and experience it. Vault 13. Vault 13 was different from every other vault on this list. There was no crazy experiment, no torture, no quotas enforced at gunpoint, no fungal plagues or FEV injections. It was meant to be the control group, sealed for 200 years as a study in prolonged isolation, the most boring experiment Vault-Tec ever designed. What came out of it may be the single most consequential chain of events in the franchise's history. Vault 13 was designed to stay shut for 2 centuries, preserving an uncontaminated human population for the Enclave to use when they were ready to retake the surface. A human reserve, clean genetics, untouched by radiation. Everything was supposed to stay sealed and quiet. Then the water chip failed. With only 150 days of reserves left, the Overseer sent scouts into the wasteland one after another. All of them failed or were captured. The last person he had left was an ordinary vault resident, a man history would remember only as the Vault Dweller. He walked out on December 5th, 2161, with a pistol, some supplies, and a deadline. What happened next was not part of the experiment. The Vault Dweller recovered the water chip, then went on to single-handedly save New California, assassinating the Master, destroying his Cathedral Command Center, and annihilating the Mariposa military base and its FEV vats. He saved an entire civilization. Then, he came home and was banished. The Overseer refused to let him back in, convinced a war hero's presence would inspire others to leave and destroy the isolation experiment. The residents revolted anyway. Most left. The Overseer was tried and sentenced to death. The Vault Dweller traveled north and helped found Arroyo, whose descendants would go on to shape the wasteland for generations. Meanwhile, the Enclave, the shadow government Vault 13 was designed to serve, sent a false all-clear signal in 2024, lured the remaining population out, slaughtered and captured them for FEV testing, and filled the empty vault with death claws to cover it up. The experiment that accidentally produced the wasteland's greatest hero also destroyed the community it was meant to preserve, and handed the Enclave exactly the chaos they needed to continue their own agenda. But if you thought Vault 13 had bad consequences, the next vault unleashed a literal storm. Vault 63. Well, Vault 63 was unique among every other vault on this list because it wasn't built for the public. It was built by a Vault-Tec board member himself, Hugo Stoltz, and his wife Cassidy, as their own personal power base. The vault was built beneath Shenandoah National Park, using stolen research from the government's shuttered Atlas program and Department of Defense robotics projects. It was incomplete when the Great War began, and Hugo made sure only his chosen residents and science staff got in. The community of Dark Hollow Falls, who had been promised shelter, were turned away at the door. Because the vault was unfinished, its radiation shielding failed. Most residents died. Those who survived were ghoulified, and the feral ones began turning on everyone around them. Hugo's own brother August was among the first to go. The entire vault abandoned its original research agenda and pivoted to one desperate question: how do you stop ghoulification before it destroys everyone? Hugo's answer was control. His final plan, linking himself telepathically to every lost, including what remained of his family, wasn't rescue. It was absorption. He wanted to unite their minds under his, eliminating their free will entirely. He called it love. It was the same thing Vault-Tec always called love. Control with a better name. As a result, Vault 63 unleashed a ravenous storm over Appalachia that never stopped. Hugo Stoltz is what happens when Vault-Tec hands a man unchecked power and calls it research. Every person the Lost have killed since 2105. Every traveler who never made it through Skyline Valley, that's his legacy. Vault-Tec's experiments and the people who conduct them always end up ruining the Wasteland years and years later. Their urge to play God never produces the miracles they promise. It just produces new ways to destroy everything around them. But a storm seems mild compared to what the next vault would unleash upon the world. Vault 96. On the surface, Vault 96 seemed different from all the others. It looked like Vault-Tec's one genuine attempt to preserve life, an ark for the atomic age, as they marketed it, a cryogenic repository for thousands of animals, staffed by elite scientists who would one day reintroduce species and restore ecological balance to the wasteland. Noble, almost beautiful, except, as we know by now, nothing Vault-Tec designs is ever that simple. The Vault's true mandate, hidden until the door sealed, was genetic mutation experiments on its animal population, with weekly quotas enforced by the mainframe under one penalty: execution. For 3 years, the scientists complied, pushing further and further. By week 142, they'd isolated a mutation that caused organisms to teleport under stress, and when unstable, subjects phased directly into each other, fusing together alive. When one scientist missed her quota trying to stabilize it, the mainframe executed her in front of her colleagues. The remaining scientists destroyed the mainframe with a virus, but it triggered a final protocol before it died, resealing the vault and killing everyone inside. The animals escaped into Appalachia. The vault sat empty until 2103, when Dr. Edgar Blackburn moved into the abandoned lab and began kidnapping Wastelanders as FEV test subjects. When cornered, he injected himself with his own perfected strain. He became a super mutant behemoth. Same experiment, same failure, different century. Blackburn didn't build his philosophy from scratch. He inherited it from a place already designed to treat living creatures as expendable. The lab that executed scientists for missing quotas became the lab that kidnapped civilians a generation later. The vault didn't need to stay open to keep destroying people. It just needed to exist. But mutants aren't the only kind of abomination Vault-Tec's experiments released onto the wasteland. Vault 22. Unlike most vaults, Vault 22 had no civilian population. So what was the experiment here? What twisted method did Vault-Tec use to torture these people? Well, actually they didn't. Not directly. Vault 22 was one of the rare vaults that seemed like Vault-Tec was genuinely trying to help. Staffed entirely by scientists with one goal, solving the global food crisis, it was called the Green Vault. Their work was genuinely intended to help humanity, until one thing led to its complete undoing: a fungal pesticide called Bovaria gasmorticana. The fungus was developed at Big MT and donated to Vault-Tec for pest control. The design was elegant. Spores infest a host, the host dies, the colony animates the corpse to spread further. Self-perpetuating, low maintenance. Nobody disclosed that it worked identically on humans. The spores leaked through the ventilation system. The first confirmed human infection was Dr. Harrison Peters. What looked like pneumonia at first, then fever, organ failure, and finally the colony animating his body into what the wasteland would come to call a spore carrier, a walking corpse whose only function was spreading infection to whatever living thing it could reach. Every antifungal treatment failed. The immune system fought the cure instead of the disease. The vault had no answer for it. The infection moved through the sealed population fast. Scientists tried igniting gas in the lower levels to burn out the carriers. The carriers attacked before they could finish. By 2096, the vault was abandoned. Everyone left inside was either a spore carrier or a fungal colony growing from what used to be a person. A party of 118 survivors fled north toward Utah, into Zion Canyon. Many of them were already infected and didn't know it. They were organized, disciplined, heavily armed scientists. And when they encountered a group of Mexican refugees already sheltering in the canyon, they didn't ask to share the space. They attacked on February 11th. They killed the men. They shot down women and children who resisted. They penned up the survivors and later cannibalized them. A former U.S. soldier named Randall Clark was living as a survivalist in Zion and witnessed everything. He spent months waging a one-man guerrilla campaign, killing 24 of the Vault 22 survivors, ambushing patrols, hunting them through the canyon until they abandoned it entirely. The spore carriers they left behind haunted Zion for generations. The Saros tribe that eventually settled there built murals of Clark as a mythical figure casting lightning on skull-headed enemies marked with the number 22. He became a god to people who never knew his name. Back in the Mojave, Vault 22 sits open with no guards and no lock, just handwritten warnings from the few who made it out. NCR scientist Thomas Hildern sent multiple mercenary teams in to recover the vault's agricultural data. None came back. The fungus ruined the vault, the survivors ruined Zion, and the spore carriers ruined it for everyone who came after. A pathogen developed at Big MT, handed to scientists who were never warned what it could do to a human being, escaped a sealed vault and haunted a canyon in Utah for 2 centuries. Nobody was ever held accountable. The vault still kills everyone who walks inside it. While Vault 22 was a science experiment gone wrong, Vault 34's experiment was more simple and much more brutal. Vault 34's experiment wasn't as complex as it was devastatingly simple. It was a completely normal vault in every way, except the armory was overstocked with firearms and ammunition, there was no lock on the door, and the living space was cut to an absolute minimum to make room for a full-size swimming pool and recreational facilities. Vault-Tec wanted to know what a society built around unlimited access to weapons would eventually do with them. For the first 100 years or so, things were relatively stable. The gun culture became identity. Firearms weren't just tools. They were the vault's social currency and cultural foundation. People grew up in a society where access to weapons was a fundamental, inalienable right built into the vault's DNA. Then the population grew too large for the space. When factions began suggesting population control measures, violence broke out. The overseer responded by announcing that all weapons would be confiscated. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. One large faction, the people who would become the Boomers, stormed the vault exit around 2023, loading themselves down with as much heavy ordnance as they could carry and fighting their way out. A second group used the distraction to ambush the armory and take everything that remained. In the chaos, the vault's reactor was catastrophically damaged, and radiation began leaking through every corridor. The main exit was sealed after the Boomers left, trapping the remaining population inside with a worsening radiation leak. By 2028, most of those who stayed had devolved into feral ghouls. The Boomers emerged into the Wasteland with military-grade weaponry, a psychology built entirely around guns as identity and survival, and zero interest in diplomacy with anyone. They walked the Mojave killing raiders, scavengers, and anyone else who challenged them. Their firepower made them virtually unkillable by any ordinary wasteland threat. Around the time of their exodus, they found Nellis Air Force Base northeast of New Vegas and settled it permanently. Over the following decades, they mounted expeditions to Area 2 and the Hawthorne Army Depot, returning with howitzers and enormous ammunition stockpiles. They installed the howitzers at Nellis with a range of several miles. Anyone who approaches Nellis gets shelled. Anyone. Mr. House couldn't talk to them. The NCR couldn't negotiate with them. Caesar's Legion couldn't threaten them. Once, the NCR tried to cut off their water supply from Lake Mead. The Boomers responded by shelling sections of the NCR's water pipeline across eastern New Vegas. The NCR restored the water flow immediately and never tried again. By 2028-1, the Boomers are also working to raise a B-29 bomber from the bottom of Lake Mead and teaching themselves to fly it, with the stated goal of flying the open skies in armored safety, raining high-explosive ordnance upon ignorant savages. Meanwhile, back at the vault they fled. The radiation from the damaged reactor has been seeping into the surrounding soil for decades, contaminating local farmland and causing ongoing problems for NCR agricultural operations in the region. Vault 34 ruined the Mojave in 2 directions at once. The vault it left behind is a radioactive tomb poisoning the surrounding land. The The people it released became an artillery-equipped faction that every major power in the Southwest has had to build their military strategy around. Every shelled approach to Nellis, every contaminated farm, every caravan that has to reroute around a base staffed by heavily armed isolationists, all of it traces back to a decision to leave an armory unlocked. Vault-Tec wanted to study what a gun culture does under pressure. They got their answer, and the Mojave has been paying for it ever since. But there is another vault whose experiment had an even bigger effect on New California, Vault-12. Vault-12 actually seemed like one of the best places to be when the bombs fell. No crazy catch about who got in or who didn't. No ideology test, no lottery. Everything looked fine and completely normal, except when the gates closed, they didn't close all the way. In one of the most simple and cruel experiments Vault-Tec ever designed, the vault was slowly filled with radiation, and there was nothing anyone inside could do to stop it. Constructed beneath Bakersfield, California, Vault-12 was publicly advertised as a technological marvel, fitted with a water purification system capable of turning sewer waste into 15,000 gallons of clean drinking water per day. The residents who signed up earned the Pressed Vault Suit Award for their preparedness. They were serious people who took their survival seriously. What they were not told was that the vault door had been deliberately engineered with a fatal flaw. It was designed not to close properly. On October 23, 2077, when word spread through Bakersfield that other vaults were already sealed, civilians rushed the entrance and forced their way in, exactly as Vault-Tec anticipated. The door did its job by failing to do it. Radiation flooded in continuously. Most people died. Those who survived underwent ghoulification, the process by which extreme radiation transforms a human being into a slow-decaying, long-lived creature that looks like a walking corpse, but, in many cases, retains full sentience, memory, and intelligence. In 2083, 6 years after the Great War, survivors emerged from the vault and founded Necropolis, the city of the dead, in the ruins of Bakersfield. It became one of the earliest post-war settlements in all of New California. By 2084, a brutal ghoul named Set had seized power, driving off the original overseer and turning Necropolis into a paranoid fortress, hostile to both humans and outsiders. Internal political strife split the community. A peaceful faction retreated to the sewers underground, where Set reluctantly provided them water, afraid that without enough bodies to defend the city, he'd be vulnerable. Then the Master learned of Vault-12's existence. His super mutant army arrived searching for uncorrupted human genetic material, and found only ghouls, useless for conversion. They occupied the city's watershed anyway, seized control of Necropolis's water supply, and enslaved the ghoul population to serve the war machine. Set was forced into a humiliating stalemate with the creatures his people hated most. Eventually, the Master purged Necropolis entirely. The ghouls who escaped scattered across New California, some reaching Gecko, others drifting as far as the capital Wasteland. Vault-Tec's experiment at Vault-12 didn't just harm the people it trapped, it ruined them in the most permanent way possible, transforming them into something the rest of the Wasteland would fear and exploit for centuries. The ghouls of Necropolis didn't ask to be what they were. They ran into a vault for the same reason everyone else did, to survive. And Vault-Tec had engineered their shelter to transform them into an underclass. The Master's army found Necropolis because Vault-12 existed. Set's city fell because the super mutants needed what was inside it. A door built not to close ruined an entire civilization of people, and then handed their destruction to the next predator who came along. But there is another vault whose simple experiment had an even bigger effect on New California. Vault-15. Vault-15 took things to the absolute extreme. They populated the entire vault with people of exact opposite ideologies. Politically, religiously, every possible worldview that was fundamentally incompatible with every other. And as you might have guessed, it led to absolute chaos. But what came out of that chaos didn't just affect a vault. It built a civilization, and then spent the next 2 centuries trying to destroy it. Vault-15 was deliberately overcrowded with radically diverse ideologues, the experiment being to observe what happens when you lock ideological enemies in a confined space together for 50 years and watch. By 2097, the answer was clear. Constant conflict, deteriorating resources, and the accumulated weight of decades of ideological warfare finally broke the vault open. The population streamed out, looting the vault of its best equipment, including its Garden of Eden creation kit. They split into 4 groups, each going their separate way according to ideology. One group used the GECK to found Shady Sands, the settlement that would grow over 2 centuries into the capital of the new California Republic. The NCR became the closest thing the post-war world has ever produced to a functioning democracy. Hundreds of thousands of citizens, a standing military, diplomatic relations, infrastructure, schools, trade routes. President Tandy, whose mother was a Shady Sands native, built it into the dominant power of the western Wasteland. All of it traces back to one group of exhausted Vault refugees walking out of Vault 15 with a GIEC and trying to build something better. The other three groups became the Khans, the Jackals, and the Vipers, three of the most brutal and persistent raider factions in all of New California. They terrorized settlements for decades, hitting caravans, burning towns, and killing anyone who couldn't defend themselves. The Khans in particular became a dynasty of misery. Their founder's son Darian returned to Vault 15 itself in 2024 to use it as a base of operations, running a criminal empire beneath the noses of the NCR and holding squatters hostage under false promises of shelter and food that was actually the product of Khan raids on NCR towns. The Great Khans, their descendants, later emerged in the Mojave Wasteland as a major drug manufacturing and distribution organization, flooding post-war communities with chems that devastated whatever stability people had managed to build. Vault 15 is the single most consequential Vault-Tec experiment in the franchise, because it built the Western Wasteland and ruined it at the same time, from the same source. Vault-Tec filled a room with ideological dynamite and lit the fuse. They wanted data on conflict. What they got was a civilization and its shadow, one trying to build something lasting, one dedicated to tearing it down, locked in conflict for 200 years. Both of them were born from the same experiment. Even the best thing the post-war world ever produced spent 2 centuries haunted by the Vault that created it. While some of these have been unintended consequences, Vault 87 was always designed to be evil. Vault 87, but perhaps the most devastating and insidious vault in all of Fallout was Vault 87. Vault 87 didn't even begin as a traditional vault experiment. It started as something much worse, and because of what they created inside it, they are sterile. The only way they can reproduce is absolutely horrific. They kidnap humans to drag them back to Vault 87 and they dip them in the FEV. They did this for nearly 200 years. Vault 87 was converted in 2076, before the Great War even began, from a standard residential vault into a covert FEV research facility. Vault-Tec partnered with elements of the U.S. military. Dr. Wayne Merrick was assigned to run the program. Residents were let into the vault not knowing that they would shortly be taken one by one to sealed chambers and exposed to a concentrated strain of the forced evolutionary virus. Medical records listed each test subject as an unexplained or undefined death. Parents watched children disappear. Spouses stopped coming home for medical appointments. The FEV transformation took 14 days. In the early stages, subjects lost all sexual characteristics. By day 10, skin became dramatically thicker and more resilient. Merrick noted in his logs that this could prove useful in combat situations. By day 14, the subjects experienced such extreme anxiety, paranoia, and aggression that they had to be destroyed. The intended outcome, controllable super soldiers, was never achieved. The result was monsters. A year after the vault was sealed, enough test subjects had been transformed that they overwhelmed the security forces. The remaining residents were either driven out into the exterior, which had taken a direct nuclear hit and was saturated with lethal radiation, killing them immediately, or subjected to the FEV themselves. The entire vault population was converted. The super mutants figured out how to open the vault and spread into the ruins of Washington, D.C. For nearly 200 years, the Vault 87 super mutants terrorized the capital Wasteland. Unlike the super mutants of the West Coast, who varied in intelligence based on how they were created, the Vault 87 strain produced creatures that grew larger, stronger, and progressively more stupid as they aged. A behemoth, the oldest of the East Coast mutants, is effectively a walking natural disaster with almost no capacity for thought. They established themselves across DC's ruins, in the National Mall, at the Statesman Hotel, throughout Falls Church. Settlements across the region spent 2 centuries fortifying everything they could, losing people to raids and kidnappings continuously. The kidnapping never stopped because it couldn't. Super mutants are sterile. Their only means of reproduction is forcing the conversion on captive humans. So they raided endlessly, systematically, generation after generation, dragging people back to Vault 87 to be dipped. By 2277, the FEV supply in the vault was finally running out. Knowing nothing about how to create more of the substance they called green stuff, the mutants were actively searching the wasteland for new sources, becoming more desperate and more dangerous the longer they went without finding one. Vault 87 brings out the worst of Vault-Tec, and Merrick is the spearhead of it. He didn't see monsters. He saw progress. He recorded his daily logs zombies with clinical detachment while people screamed in the chambers. The creatures created by the FEV that came out of Vault 87 are the synthesis of everything that's wrong with Vault-Tec: the complete detachment from human beings, the indifference to consequences, the insane obedience to scientific progress at any cost. But even Vault 87 isn't comparable to the 3 vaults that have had the biggest effect on the Wasteland. Disturbed vaults: 31, 32, and 33. Every vault on this list was cruel, some by neglect, some by design, some through consequences nobody predicted. But all of them, at least officially, were experiments, attempts to gather data, answer questions, advance some twisted understanding of human sociology or biology. Vaults 31, 32, and 33 were something different entirely. These weren't about data, they were about control. Complete, multi-generational, centuries-long control over human beings who never knew they were being controlled. And when the people inside finally found out the truth, they chose to die rather than continue living under it. Vault-Tec executive Bud Askins designed Bud's buds around one obsession: good managers die. Every generation has to start over. What if you could preserve your best managers across centuries, wake them up periodically, and gradually breed the civilian population into people who naturally deferred to them? Given enough time, you could engineer an entirely loyal civilization of super managers. Vault 31 was a cryochamber filled entirely with hand-picked Vault-Tec junior executives. Vaults 32 and 33 were filled with civilians genetically pre-screened as favorable breeding stock. Told nothing. Given a comfortable life and one piece of cultural programming so effective it ran for over 200 years without being questioned. When things look glum, vote 31. Every overseer of Vaults 32 and 33 came from Vault 31. Bud would thaw an executive every few decades, integrate them into the neighboring vaults, let them win elections he'd already fixed, breed them into the civilian gene pool, and retire them. Bud himself didn't freeze. He preserved his brain in a jar attached to a robotic platform and managed the program for over 2 centuries, his mind slowly deteriorating but remaining coherent enough to pull the right levers at election time. The residents of Vault 32 found out. In 2294, they discovered they were not a community, but a breeding pool for corporate executives who'd been manipulating every aspect of their lives since before they were born. Their overseer was found strangled in his chair. The walls were written in blood. We know the truth. Death to management. Then Vault 32 destroyed itself. They hung from the rafters, put forks in toasters. Those who wouldn't die willingly were murdered by those who would. The survivors tried to batter through the door to Vault 31 with blowtorches and sledgehammers before finally giving up and starving. Betty Pearson, one of Bud's buds, now overseer of Vault 33, discovered the massacre 2 years later and covered it up completely. Cleaned the vault, moved half of Vault 33's population in to restart the program. The experiment was too important to let an entire vault's worth of deaths interrupt it. Hank McLean, Vault 33's overseer, a Vault 31 executive thawed and trained to believe the world was Vault-Tec's to shape, used the corporation's retained nuclear capabilities to bomb Shady Sands. The target was the capital of the new California Republic, a thriving democratic city of hundreds of thousands, the most sophisticated governing body in post-war America. His justification was ideological. The NCR represented competition to Vault-Tec's managed world. His personal motivation was that his wife had fled there rather than returned to him. As Lee Moldaver told Lucy McLean, that's how Vault-Tec deals with competition. The bomb detonated. Shady Sands became a crater. The NCR died with its capital. Young Maximus, orphaned in the blast, was found by Brotherhood of Steel soldiers. His entire life trajectory shaped by the moment Hank McLean's bomb went off. Vaults 31 through 33 are the closing argument of the entire franchise. Every vault on this list produced some horror that escaped into the world. Raider gangs, super mutants, fungal plagues, ghoul cities. But this cluster shows what Vault-Tec was actually building with all of it. Not experiments, a monopoly. A civilization managed by executives who never aged, populated by people engineered to trust them. And when those people discovered the truth, they wrote it in blood and chose death over compliance. The most hopeful civilization the post-war world ever produced, the NCR, built on 200 years of human stubbornness, was destroyed by a man thawed from cryosleep, fulfilling a mandate. Vault-Tec's experiments accidentally created it. Their executives deliberately destroyed it when it grew powerful enough to threaten their plan. The Wasteland doesn't just carry the scars of Vault-Tec's experiments, it carries the blueprint. Every raider tribe and super mutant army and fungal haunted canyon and artillery shelling militia is a chapter in a document Vault-Tec started writing before the bombs fell and never stopped writing after. War never changes, and Vault-Tec made sure of it. If you want to see every Vault-Tec experiment, click the video on the screen.